So like Sean, the deeper that we've dug into our project, the more complex it's become. So in unions, workers attempt to exert agency. So what they try and do is they try and take control over their own working lives and over their personal lives as well. So agency is exerted through struggle, and what that is often over the right to shape economic landscapes and communities. So this occurs in place, but this has been historically neglected by industrial relations scholars. So industrial relations scholars think of the world almost as flat, and we just have models and we put the models onto the landscape and away we go, and it's all, it's all okay. But as Rainey and et al. Argue, geography matters because industrial relations practices depend on the way actors use geography to their advantage and the disadvantage of those with whom they're in conflict. So what we're seeing, they're trying to bring into it, is the fact that industrial relations happens over an uneven landscape. So usually geography has been seen to advantage capital, which can traditionally move factories and employment around the globe to labour's disadvantage. So even if they don't actually do it, they have the threat through whipsawing to try and, I suppose, reduce conditions and to discipline labour. So while that appears also great in theory about the fact that capital can just move around the world, many factories or many employers are located in areas because that confers an advantage to them. So what we can think here is about, in the Australian context at least, mining, and you can probably think in the Canadian context about forestry, and certainly in the northwest coast of Tasmania, we can think about vegetables and potatoes. So what we're going to turn to now, I suppose, is should have skipped a slide, but anyway. So what we're going to turn our attention to now is about power, which has re-emerged as an interest of items amongst industrial relations scholars. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I'll start with Wright, who first detailed two types of union power. The first is associational power, which he defines as workers' collective organisational and structural power, which comes from workers, and structural power, which comes from workers' location in the economic system. So power can be activated by the use of power resources, and here Christian and Gregor have done quite a lot of detail work on that, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail there. But these can be deployed at different societal levels, and we argue that time in much of, again, the industrial relations literature, time, space and place are a bit viewed as an aside. So labour geography has something to say about that, with Alan arguing that we've lost the sense that geography makes a difference to the exercise of power, and that power is inherently spatial and spatiality is imbued with power. So while capital, at least is in theory mobile, labour is rooted in place, and this can be a source of power. So capital's mobility can mean that it's always viewed as transitory and therefore in, but not of a community. So capital's ability to unfix itself in a place is also, though, of course, mediated by politics and by labour's agency. So consequently, the scale of collective bargaining is a political struggle. So it's geography, a geographically deconstructed and divided union structure may result in localised and fragmented collective bargaining that exposes unions to whipsawing. So space and place offers both the potential and constraint to labour's agency. So I'll move now to Simplot in Tasmania, and Simplot's a US multinational, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, except to say they've got 2 factories in northwest Tasmania. They're there because it's one of Australia's best vegetable growing areas. And we can see in the photo there pictures of a rich soil and rows of potatoes. So the Devonport factory employs about, it freezes vegetables, and it employs about 60 to 80 permanent staff and around 260 casual workers. And it's Australia's only frozen vegetable processing plant. There were others, but they have been closed down by the multinationals. So the Alderstone plant produces frozen fries, and it employs about 200 people with another 70 casuals. So there's 19 kilometres distance between the 2 factories. And there's also a small agricultural machinery depot at Wesley Vale. There's 2 other sites interstate in New South Wales. Bathurst produces canned vegetables, and Kelso produces seafood, a delicious Australian treat known as fish fingers, if anyone has had them. It's disgusting. Okay. So we'll now briefly look at just a couple of rounds of bargaining. So in 2015 and 17, the AMWU went into this bargaining round hoping, to get it done quickly. It had quite a lot of success in the previous round, and it wanted to come to a quick agreement. As we say in the union movement, a good agreement is a quick agreement. So Simplot wanted to take back control of the process, and it lawyered up. So the workers saw this as a bit of an affront. They said, we were used to being at the bargaining table, and now they just viewed us as dirty factory workers. And there was also talk of restructuring and closing of factories. So, we have this threat here of whipsawing. So what they wanted to do was try and divide the sites. So these 5 sites all worked together in what's called in Australia a single bargaining unit. And what they wanted to do was try and split them up, the employer, by offering differential conditions to them, and in that way divide the union. So negotiations proceeded slowly until 2014, when the union successfully balloted for industrial action. So Simplot responded with a media campaign, and they painted the union's campaign as being solely about money. And that resonated with this disadvantaged region. The northwest coast of Tasmania is one of Australia's poorest regions, and the workers were abused in the street. So they were told, you just want the money, and you're threatening jobs in our region. So that sort of really quite, and as well, Simplot, I should say, prohibited people from talking to the media through their social media policy, which I think in some ways fits in with perhaps what Sean says in a different way about institutional power. They had a short-lived strike, and they're about to start more industrial action when Simplot said, we'll make you a wage offer of 2% or 2% a year with a 2.5% sign-on bonus. Now, for the people who are permanent workers, that probably isn't a lot. When you've got a significant casual workforce that doesn't receive holiday pay or sick leave, and it's coming around to Christmas time, $700, $800, $900 in your pocket's a pretty good deal. So what happened was that in Australia, the Australian system, the employer can put the agreement to the workforce. So to get an agreement up, you don't have just the union employees vote on it, you have the entire workforce. So even though the negotiating team suggested to people that they shouldn't agree to it, the majority voted it up. So the the belief was there, but the casual vote had got the agreement up, and it exposed divisions between the permanent and casual workers. So in other words, associational power was exploited, or the lack of it was exploited by the employer. And the Bathurst and Devonport sites, which had been mentioned for closure, they voted for the agreement, while the Ulverston site said, no, we want less, we don't agree with the agreement. So some of the workers were disappointed with the outcome, as we can see from the slide, the last quote on the slide. So in the next, I suppose I'll get a bit of a move on. They'd learnt from the last EB, and they said, the union has, and said we need to build more associational power. So what it did was it then tried to build solidarity between the sites through holding barbecues and doing things with the work with the delegates, and they changed the narrative that because they were the previous narrative that had been talked about them, away from being about money to being about conditions and respect. Simplot, of course, wanted the reverse. It wanted a minimal pay rise, and it wanted a whole lot of them to trade off a whole lot of rights. And again, management controlled the pace of bargaining. And around Christmas time, the union put in for a ballot for industrial action. It failed to get up, so it left the delegates pretty dispirited. They did some more work, held another ballot 6 months later, and that got up, and soon after that, they got another agreement. And this time, having learnt from the previous one, they got a back pay rather than a sign-on bonus. So it meant that a sign-on bonus doesn't count towards increasing your pay on an ongoing basis. It's a one-off payment. So during this time, of course, as well, the AMWU tried to create links with the community. So it tried to create external solidarity, but it was refused. The local sporting club refused, saying it didn't want to have political involvement. This was just in spite of Simplot sponsoring something like 17 local sporting clubs, which apparently isn't considered to be political. So how was power exerted? So I'd argue, I suppose, and this perhaps be interesting to see what Sean has to say, that in some ways Simplot used institutional power by, for example, prohibiting through its policies its workers from speaking out about their industrial campaign. And also, I suppose arguably, of course, it also, well, it's a bit hard to say whether Simplot made positive use of industrial relations law, or really it was one used to against the workers, but it also used narrative resources to try to frame the workers as greedy, and it also used division. And I suppose the argument I'd make as well is that we think a lot about union power, we don't actually think about employer power. So the AMW used associational power, and it created, unsuccessfully tried to create external solidarity. It did use narrative resources to reframe its bargaining as being from about wages to being about terms and conditions. So where does that actually leave us? So much of the recent focus on union power, I think, has been to the neglect, or we think has been to the neglect of employer power, and we can't look really at one without the other. So as E.P. Thompson argues, context is important, and here we can reinsert space and place. So trade union power is mediated by space and place, whereas the employer's power is mediated by space and time. So time in the sense that it was able to exploit divisions between the casual workers. So the Simplot workers' spatial embeddedness, that is the fact that they lived in this local and worked in this place, should have been an advantage, but they're unable to grasp it. So the AMWU's use of associational power was multifaceted, and it had significant spatial aspects in the sense that what it did was try and create, or try and keep together a group of geographically remote sites in a single bargaining unit. So space and place do matter to union power, but how do we treat it? So space, Massey argues, is the product of social relations and is never finished. So Rainey and all argue space is a source of power, while Tattersall argue that scale and place can be power resources. So we can sort of see these muddiness around what is going on. So there have been criticisms of the power resources approach about the multiplicity of sources of power, and we do need to pay, I think, more attention to space and place. So implicit in power resources, I think, is agency. That is, power resources exist and are activated or not by worker action. So I think that's, to me, that's quite important about power, is this sense of agency. So I sometimes think in a lot of these debates we get at very abstract levels and they lose sort of, I suppose, context. So if we contextualise space and thereby place as a product of social relationships, that we can then make the case for it to be seen as a power resource, one that the, I suppose, Simplot workers could not activate or used, but that existed and nevertheless had the potential to be used. So there we again bring in this sense of agency. So I'll finish there. Thank you.